We are in Genesis chapter 45 tonight. I don't know if you guys have ever had something happen to you that was just completely unbelievable. Not that it's unbelievable, but it's unbelievable. It's just hard to wrap your mind around, like what's going on. And I was just thinking through my life and thinking about things like that in my life. And probably the most stark was when Shannon told me that she was pregnant. Because, I mean, we had just waited for 8 years, for her to get pregnant. And, of course, we'd had some prophecies and things like that. So we you know what's going to happen. But then I remember being jolted awake by this hysteric woman. And she's like, oh my goodness, and she's like, has this thing in my face. And I was like, what is that? And she's like, it's a pregnancy test, I'm pregnant. And she's like, look. And I was like, which end do I touch? I didn't know which end I was supposed to touch on that. And so I'm looking at it, and there it is, she's pregnant, and, the Lord has done it. And it's just one of those things like, you believe it, but you don't believe it. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things that just blow your mind. And as we've been looking at our text, you remember Joseph has just been through this crazy journey of being sold into slavery by his brothers, betrayed by them, then from slavery being betrayed by his boss's wife and thrown into prison, and then betrayed by the guy who he interpreted his dream, the chief butler, because he forgot about him for 2 years. And so you got a guy who's just dealt with a lot of disappointment in his life. We're talking 2 decades, of disappointment, really, as he's been in Egypt for 20 years. Now, part of that, the last part of that, 7 years of that, has been as second in command in Pharaoh's, in Pharaoh's kingdom. He is like second to Pharaoh only. But in a sense, there's a disappointment in that, too, because, he gets put into this powerful position, and you think, any moment the Lord's going to tell me to go and confront my brothers, and they're going to have to bow their faces to the ground. And maybe it was because God's gracious, and God is working these things out, as Joseph marries his wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, whatever his name is, the priest of On, and so he's given this beautiful woman, no doubt, being head in command, the prize woman to be his wife, and then he has his son Manasseh, and really I think in a way Manasseh was a turning point, as having a child is for many people in their life. It's that turning point as you give birth to this child, and your priorities, you guys notice that when you have a child, your priorities shift. It's no longer about you, it's about them, and now he has this Manasseh. He sees, he's probably just sitting there thinking about, his position that God has given him, the responsibility and the satisfaction of all of that. His wife, who no doubt he's in love with, and she's a treasure to him, and now his son Manasseh, and he says that the Lord, he calls him Manasseh because the word Manasseh means to forget. The Lord has caused me to forget all of my toil, all of my turmoil, all the pain that I've been through, and it was at that point that his son's born. He's exalted into this position. He's given this wife, and he finally says, you know what? The Lord had a purpose in all of that. And so during that time, that 7 years of kind of waiting on the Lord as he's in that position, he's been 13 years as slave and prisoner, now 7 years as second in command, he's had time to process what's happened in his life and to work that out with God. And that all that before his brothers would come down from Canaan, knowing that they needed to get that grain to survive, and he sees them coming, and no doubt a lot of things going on in his heart as he sees his brothers coming from Canaan and trying to buy some grain. And so remember, he treats them pretty harshly, but I mean, how many of you guys would have treated him that well? Right? I mean, it's pretty harshly, but there's a reason for all of it. And so too, for the Lord in our lives, when things happen in our lives or difficulty comes up in our lives, God has a reason for all of it. He doesn't waste any of it. And Joseph had a reason for every single thing he put on those guys, because he wanted to test to see if they were still as wicked and deceitful as they were back then. He wanted to test to see if they were still hating. He left his brother Benjamin behind. Were they hating his brother Benjamin? Did they kill his brother Benjamin? Is his brother Benjamin still, okay? They mistreated him. And so, they come without Benjamin. And so he's like, hey, I got to see if Benjamin's still alive. So he says, you come back with Benjamin. And like, our dad won't let us. And he's like, you come back with Benjamin. You don't come back at all. And I'm going to keep one of you as prisoners. So Simeon had to sit in jail. Well, they went back home and then came back. And of course, it was a very difficult thing for their father Joseph Jacob. These J names, to get Jacob to let their son go back home. And so it was a very difficult thing for him to leave home to go to Egypt. And so it's very difficult for him to let him go, having lost, remember he says, Joseph is no more, Simeon is now gone, you bereave me of my children, you want to bereave me of Benjamin too. If he goes, it will bring my gray hairs down in sorrow to the grave, and so he's very dramatic about it. But finally he says, okay, fine, we might as well let him go because we're going to die anyway, so just he goes. And if I'm bereaved, I'm bereaved. And so they come back, and remember that was a very different encounter. They get there, Joseph bringing them to his house rather than to the regular place where they would buy the grain. And they're thinking, oh no, because the money was in our sacks, he's going to make us his slaves, we're in big trouble. And of course, instead of them being in trouble, what Joseph does is he sits them down at a meal, brings Simeon in, and then sits them down in order. And so they know something's up. But sits them down from oldest to youngest, and then give Benjamin 5 times as much as he gave the other ones. And of course, that was just a gesture of how are they going to feel when Benjamin's treated like a king? Are they going to resent him? Are they going to give him the stink eye? He's watching for all these things. And then after the feast and after they've been honored, they send him off, but they put the divining cup of the Grand Viceroy is what his title was. He put the divining cup in Benjamin's sack, send them off, and then chase them down. And that's kind of where we left off last time, was they got chased down. They were stopped by the steward. They said, hey, why would you steal from our master? And they said, we didn't steal. We would never do that. Let whoever stole from you be killed, and the rest of us will be your slaves. And he said, oh, okay, whatever you say, but we'll make the one who stole, he will be the slave, and the rest of you will go free. And so they searched through all the sacks, finding the cup in Benjamin's sack. Everybody, and this was really what Joseph was looking for, everybody ripped their clothes. That it was a sign of deep mourning, deep regret. And instead of saying, see you later, Benjamin, we're out of here, stupid decision, buddy, sorry you lost, and leaving back home, they came back, all of them came back with Benjamin and Judah, pleading with Joseph, saying, this would kill our father, please, our sin has found us out. And really repentant as he stands before Joseph, who he believes is Zaphnath-Paneah, the second in command. Of course, that was the name that they gave Joseph. And so he's telling Zaphnath-Paneah, man, I just take me in his place, offering himself up as a slave in his brother's place, just as Jesus would offer himself up for our transgression. Such an awesome picture. And of course, Joseph then, as we saw last time, he could not restrain himself. And so looking again at verse 1, it says, then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, make everyone go out for me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. And so very intense. Joseph, they're thinking, okay, Joseph's going to, he's going to kill us all. He's going to take our brother. What's going to happen? They don't know what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden, he screams out something in Egyptian. All the Egyptians leave, so he's there alone with his brothers, and they're thinking, oh no, here it comes. This is where he's going to lay something down. And then the last thing they ever expected to happen, you have to realize he's shaved, he has no beard, he's shaved bald, he might have one of those weird black wigs on, and he has eyeliner on. He's just completely a different part than them. And then he begins to speak Hebrew to them. And no doubt they are they're floored. They're like, what is going on? He just starts to speak Hebrew to them. And this is what he said, verse 3. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence, no doubt. Now, of course, they'd already told him that his father still lived. But, it's just one of those things. You have to tell me for sure, He knew it was going to happen. One of the guys asked after service last time, well, if Joseph had the dream, was it a lack of faith that he's asking, is my father still okay? And it's just the way we are. We know that what the Lord said, but we still want to see the full fruition of it, right? That's just the way it is. When my wife and I got pregnant, we knew it was going to be a boy because of the prophecies that we've been given. We knew it was going to be a boy, but we went to the hospital here, and they had a brand new ultrasound machine. They scanned the little guy, and they said 70% it's a little girl. And we're like, no. And we looked, and Shannon's like, well, I don't know. What do you think? And I said, well, maybe the lady was wrong, but I don't know. I think it's got to be a boy. She said it was a boy. It's got to be a boy. So we had a fetal photos. I think we might have a gift certificate, or maybe we paid for it. I don't know. We went down to fetal photos and got one of those 3D imaging ones. They did the 3D, and it was a boy. And so we were like, see, they don't know anything over there. But that's the reality. Sometimes you just got to know. Tell me again that my dad's still okay, because he hasn't seen his dad in 20 years, and no doubt that's a huge hole in his heart. And so he says, just okay. So 1 minute, blah 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 blah, blah, and then everybody runs out, and then he says, "I'm Joseph," and you can imagine, how would you feel? Yeah, you just like, exactly. I'm in trouble. Well, even if they have to be having some sort of cognitive dissonance. That's when you can't believe what you're seeing and hearing. It's just that it's a state of unbelief, and sometimes people completely miss things because their mind just dismisses it as, this can't be real, right? And your mind is really good at that, just taking things away from your eyesight, taking things away from your memory that you just can't process. And so no doubt they're just kind of stunned, in stunned silence. And, it would be like if an IRS agent came to your house and said, we're seizing all your property, we're taking everything away from you, they have a warrant, they serve you, they start they come into your house, you're thinking, I'm losing everything, and then all of a sudden he says, I'm just kidding, I'm with Publishers Clearinghouse, and then brings out a big check and says, hey, you won $1 million, you'd be like, what? What kind of joke is this? That's not funny, I'm losing everything. It's just throwing him for a loop. No, that's a bad illustration. But anyway, okay, if they can process it, like Jim said, they are horrified, they are stupefied, they are terrified. Joseph is alive, and he's the man, right? He's the man that we've been talking to our dad about, the man this and the man that, and the man won't let us, and now the man is Joseph, and so we really did the man wrong, and we're going to be in big, big, big trouble. And so such a crazy thing. And so they're just kind of dumbfounded. Verse 4, and Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. If they weren't terrified, now they are. Because, remember, I'm the one you sold. You remember? Did you forget about me? I'm the one you sold into Egypt. Now, this is the first time that Ben hears this, Benjamin. This is the first time he hears that he was sold by his brothers. You can imagine what a bombshell that was for the youngest brother to hear that. And he's probably the only one who's maybe relieved and excited here, and all the other ones are like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? We're in so much trouble. So you're the brothers, you're the one who sold me. And verse 5, he says, but now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Now, none of this would be possible. Something's grinding here. None of this would have been possible if Joseph hadn't completely forgiven his brothers. You think about that. Because if he hadn't forgiven them, they would all be sitting in jail, right? They would all be dead, possibly, other than Benjamin. And yet, what does he say here? He says, you sold me here, but God. But God sent me before you to preserve life. Remember Psalm 105, where it says, God called for a famine in the land, so he sent a man, Joseph. And that's such a chilling thought, to think that something so horrible could happen to your life, something so off track could happen in your life, and that it was God who was the one who called for it. God was the one who orchestrated it all. And that's a little bit terrifying to me, to think, what off track thing could happen in my life, and yet it's God's plan. And yet there comes in a place where I'm going to be going from maybe a little bit of confusion, possibly anger. Maybe I'll spend some time, and I think it's not uncommon to spend some time being angry with God about the things that have happened in my life. And yet, ultimately, that tells me a lot about my anger towards the situation, and bitterness that I want to hold on to tells me a lot about my relationship with God, my trust towards God, doesn't it? Because here is a man who has been wronged in every sense of the word and in every way you could possibly think, and yet still trusting God, still believing that God has goodwill towards me. And I think that that's really where we have to find ourselves as Christians, and not angry, not bitter. I have to forgive because God forgave me, right? So if somebody's wronged me, he's forgiven them, I have to forgive them. And yet also to believe, God allowed this in my life for a reason. And his will for me, his intentions toward me are good. Now, you think of the grace of God and how gracious he can be. Even in the midst of complete turmoil, he can still bless. And I just think of the children of Israel as they're being punished for their disobedience for God, their idolatry, and all the things that they'd been through. And Jeremiah prophesying to them that you guys are going to go down into Egypt, or it's going to be down to Babylon, rather. You're going to be taken away to Babylon. Don't resist. And then he says there in Jeremiah 27:11, I think it is. Is that right? 29:11? Somewhere in there. One of those two. He says, I know the thoughts that I have towards you, thoughts of good and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope, something like that. He tells them, I'm going to give you a future and a hope. And I was pondering that, and I was like, well, yeah, 70 years later, they're going to go back to the land of Israel. But then he goes to describe to them, he says, when you go into the land of Babylon, I want you to buy houses, I want you to have families, I want you to work jobs, I want you to prosper there. And he says, I will prosper you in the land of Babylon. And so too for you and for me. There's going to be something that God has planned, a reason for the difficulty in our lives that he has for us. And that doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to be all peachy keen at the other end of the road, but it does mean a couple of things. It means that in the midst of Babylon, maybe you're suffering, maybe you're going through a trial, but in the midst of it, he has grace for you. if you are willing to accept it. And that is such an important part of it. If you are willing to believe it. God, I believe your intentions for me are good. I know that everything seems to be going sideways, but I believe your intentions for me are good. And when we have that attitude, then what follows that is peace that passes understanding, joy in the midst of the turmoil. It is prosperity in Babylon, is what it is. And even though everything around us is corrupt, God gives us grace to walk every step through it with joy, rather than this bemoaning. I mean, how fun is it to be bitter? Oh, we love it. Oh, my precious. You know, it's like, I can't let go of it. Me needs it, you know, right? But if we do let go of it, because, I don't know, we just feel entitled to that bitterness, don't we? But if we let go of it, then we're set free. We're set free to feel joy, free to feel grace, free to receive the blessings of God, even in the midst of struggle. And Joseph, no doubt, he no doubt came to grips with this as he walked with God through the prison, through the slavery, through even these 7 years of plenty, and a couple years beyond that. He has walked with God. But unforgiveness is only possible when we refuse to acknowledge God. And in other words, it's a lack of faith. So don't be hard on yourself, you know. Just allow God to grant you repentance of that. You know, and just say, God, I just acknowledge that this is falling short of what you want from me, what your glory is. Sin. Confess the bitterness of sin and ask God to give you forgiveness. And maybe it's even towards God, but we just have to ask God to grant us forgiveness for that. And so Joseph he said, hey, you guys, don't feel bad for yourselves. Don't be mad at yourselves. You know, it doesn't ever work when I tell my kids that. You know, they're mad at me because of what they did. And I say, don't be mad at yourself. I'm not mad at myself, I'm mad at you. You know, well, I didn't do it. I didn't break that. You know, you did. Anyway, verse 6. For these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. So he fills them in on what's going to come. He's saying, hey, it was 7 years of plenty. Now it's 7 years of famine, and we're only 2 years into this thing. And so you guys need to buckle up. This is not going to end anytime soon. He says, and God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and the ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Now this is profound, because he's not just saying, hey, God sent me here to preserve the world alive, which he does say eventually. You know, God sent me to preserve the world alive in Genesis 50, verse 20. Let's look at that real quick. Genesis 50, verse 20. And this is later on, after Jacob dies, or Israel dies, his brothers are a little bit concerned. You know, dad's dead now. Joseph's going to get his revenge. You know, they think that the other shoe's going to fall. And this is what Joseph says. He says, but as for you, you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring it about, as it is this day, to save many people alive. See, so Joseph he's acknowledging what his brothers did, and once again he tells them, hey, don't feel bad for yourself, don't be scared, but realize that what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Now, what's interesting is he tells them here that God specifically preserved them. That this whole thing, all the grain and all the people who were saved in this specific thing, was to preserve the children of Israel specifically. And why? Well, because if they die, we all die. Right? If the Messiah doesn't come into the world, which is coming through the children of Israel, then the whole thing is for nothing. And so kind of an interesting thing. Not just, you think about it, Joseph saved many people alive. He was the savior of the world. Anybody who was hungry had to come to Joseph, and he was the only one that could give them bread to save their lives. But if you think about it, it has farther reaching implications in that the Messiah was going to come through them, and now all of us are saved because of that. So, this is pretty profound, the job that Joseph was given, and it seems that Joseph kind of understands that God has brought him ahead to save them and to preserve, before you, to preserve life. Verse 6, it says, "These 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting." So this is what's coming, guys. Verse 7, "And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity," I already read this, didn't I? "For you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and ruler throughout all the land of Egypt." That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? He's made me a father to Pharaoh. Now, what's interesting about this, I was thinking about this, and we don't know exactly which Pharaoh. Different people argue over which Pharaoh did Joseph sit under. And some people have a pretty good idea about it, and other people argue with that idea. But some of these pharaohs were just kids when they were put on the throne. They were just young. And so it's possible that Joseph is even older than Pharaoh. At 30 years old, when he came out of the jail, Pharaoh could have been in his teens, in his 20s, but he said, he's made me a father to Pharaoh. In other words, Pharaoh looks to him as kind of a father figure, which is kind of weird. Pharaoh was supposed to be the embodiment of the human form of Ra, God incarnate, in a sense, is what they believed of Pharaoh. And yet this Pharaoh looked to Joseph as somebody who was a father to him. And that's significant. I think in a lot of ways that's why people call Catholic priests father, because they kind of look to them as a father figure in their life. One of the weirdest moments in my life was when my stepdad, who got saved, a few years back, came to me and said, I kind of look to you as like a father figure in my life. That was the weirdest thing in my life I'd ever experienced. But, that's just true. When somebody is, and in a sense, like Paul was the spiritual father to many people, so too, oftentimes pastors and other people like that become, people who mentor other people in the Lord, become kind of a father figure in their life. However, having said that, what does the Bible say about that? Call no man father, right? Jesus, is our God, and the Father, God is our Father, so not something that we should seek for as a person for other people to call us Father, nor should we endow somebody with that title in our lives. But he's saying, hey, this is how Pharaoh looks at me, and he's made me ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. And so verse 9, it says, and so he kind of changes gears, tells them, this is what you're going to do. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord in all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, and your children, and your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, for there are still 5 years of famine. And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. So he's not speaking through an interpreter anymore. So you shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt and of all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here. So now he's commanding them, go and tell my father. And this is what's interesting. He says, I want you to be near me. I'm going to have you dwell in the land of Goshen, which is right kind of up in the north of the fertile delta of the Nile. You're going to dwell in the land of Goshen, just north of Egypt proper, just north of where Joseph is. And I want you to be near me. Now, think about that for a minute. I mean, would you, if your family betrayed you, would you like to live near them? And yet, when there's love, it's amazing to me how many people move here. I was just talking to somebody today, and they said, oh, yeah, we moved here because our kids live over in Boise, or our kids live close by here. And people move to where their kids are because they want to be near their kids. And they move to where their family is because they want to be near to their family, oftentimes. And yet, sometimes people move away, right? And maybe you've met those people. Like, I don't want to be anywhere near my family. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard to be close to family because it can be a trying thing, depending on your family. So he's saying, he has every reason to say, I don't want you anywhere near here. I'll send money for Dad, but stay away. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, I want you near me. And that shows you that forgiveness has really taken place. And then he says that he is going to provide for them. I'm going to provide for you guys. And that's what's amazing is Joseph really was the one with the key to all of the resources in the world at that time. And as we move on, this famine continues, the people are going to bring all their money. Joseph's going to take everybody's money. And then he's going to take everybody's cattle because they don't have any money. I mean, they're going to die or they're going to give it, right? And then he's going to take everybody's land. And then he's going to take everybody's body, right? They're going to be his servants, and they're going to work the land that they gave to him so that they could have food. It's one of those things. If you don't have food, you don't have life. And here Joseph knows, these guys are going to have to come to me. And so he says, I'm going to bring you in amongst me, and I am going to take care of you. Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. That's had to be huge. I mean, Benjamin probably doesn't even remember Joseph. Only stories. He was too young. It's funny when, you see a kid and you're like, I haven't seen you in ages. Man, you used to be this little guy. Now you're like 6 feet tall. And you always look at the kid's face at that moment. They're like, I have no idea who you are. This is creeping me out, right? And yet, he's heard about his brother all these years. And no doubt, Joseph remembers what little Benjamin looked like. And he can see it, in this adult man's face. He can see that little Benjamin in there. And he just runs to him. He's alive. He's probably worried about him all this time. He just runs to him. He couldn't restrain himself anymore. And he just starts to cry, and Benjamin starts to weep on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. Can you imagine the things that they had to talk about? Whatever happened to that guy? How's your, did you guys get married? What's going on? How are your kids? How many kids do you have? They have 240 collective years of memories that they have to share with each other. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I mean, it has to be a trip. But I love that he kissed all of his brothers. Just kind of goes to show you how much he really has forgiven them, how much he's given up his right that he could have kept to be angry with them. Verse 16, now the report of it was heard by Pharaoh. So Pharaoh, everybody heard him crying anyway, in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. So it pleased Pharaoh and all his servants well, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your animals and depart and go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your household and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. So Pharaoh hears Joseph now you have to realize this. Everybody in Egypt, within 2 years' time, would have been pretty much dead if Joseph hadn't saved them. So it is not lost on Pharaoh how much Joseph means to not only the kingdom of Egypt, but all the people in the surrounding regions. It is Joseph who has made Pharaoh wealthy beyond measure. I mean, Joseph is selling all this grain back to the people and getting all this money, and no doubt Pharaoh looks in his treasury room and he's like, holy cow, and we're only 2 years into this thing. And all this money has poured in. And so he's, over the moon grateful to Joseph. And he hears that Joseph has family, and he's probably thinking to himself, what can I do to bless this guy who has saved my life, who has saved me a ton of pain and has made me the most wealthy person in the world. And so he hears that they have it, and Pharaoh offers them, and this is beautiful, he offers them the best. He's like, I'm not going to, hey, move up here, we'll take care of you. He's like, I'm going to give you the best of the land. And Goshen was one of those places. It was right next to the delta of the Nile River, and beautiful area still to this day. And so 19 it says, and now you are commanded, do this. So Pharaoh's pulling out his authority. Take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come. Also do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. And so he says, take carts, go pick them up. Don't bring anything with you. Don't burden yourself. You don't even need to bring anything because everything is here. We do that when we tell people, come to our house, stay at our house. You don't bring anything. We'll take care of you, right? It's not always true, is it? Like, come sleep. Why don't pay for a hotel? Sleep on my crummy old stretch out hide a bed, with a big bar in the middle of your back. Why spend the money on a hotel? All that luxury and that nice pool and the shower and everything. Stay in our house and be uncomfortable. But that's not what this is at all. This is like, come, be blessed. Don't worry. You will be taken care of. You don't even need to bring anything. And so, in verse 21, then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provision for the journey. So he's not just saying, don't bring anything. He's saying, hey, take stuff with you so you don't have to bring anything. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. So he really is making up for lost time with his brother Benjamin. His brother Benjamin, who is the only son of his mother, the only other son of their mother Rachel. And so that's a lot of money, 300 pieces of silver. Benjamin instantly becomes wealthy, and extra garments to change into. 23, and he sent to his father these things. He sent to his father these things: 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed and said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. Now, this is an interesting phrase. So he sends them with all this stuff. Now, remember when Jacob is sending them back to Joseph, the man, remember? When you go to the man, take almonds, take myrrh, take all these spices and aloes, and go up to him, give him this gift. And so they gave him that present. And no doubt he's thinking, okay, we're going to get some grain back. He had no idea that an entourage of 10 donkeys and all kinds of goods and beautiful things, wonders of the land of Egypt, would be coming back to him. But then Joseph tells them, as he's sending them away, notice he says, don't become troubled on the way. Literally, he says, okay, guys, don't fight on the way. Don't quarrel with one another on the way. Now, I thought about that, because I was like, what do you mean, don't be troubled on the way? And so I looked it up, and it just literally means don't quarrel with each other. Because you can imagine how this would go down. They're like blown away. Okay, Joseph has forgiven us, at least it seems. And now we leave, and somebody says, yeah, Simeon, I think it was your idea. And yeah, but you're the one who said, and to start to bicker about whose fault it was. Because that's what we do. Whenever we're anxious, we like to throw blame. And he says, hey guys, don't quarrel on the way. Just be blessed. Go down to Egypt. Don't fight. Just go. Then, verse 25, they came up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is the governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. It's almost like, This is the big one. I think this is it, you know. I mean, it's like he's overwhelmed by the news. It's like, I don't know what to even do with that. And yet he doesn't believe them. You know, same thing, you know, cognitive dissonance. He's like, stop, it's not even a funny joke, right? Have you ever been told that? My wife says, that's not funny, honey. That's not, don't say, you know, don't talk like that. It's not funny. And that's pretty much what he's saying. He did not believe them. His heart stood still. They just barge into the house. He's sitting in his recliner watching the Cosby Show or something, you know, and they're like, hey, Jacob's alive, and he's the ruler of the land of Egypt. What? Stop joking around. You know, my heart jumped. Verse 27, but when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Now I want you to notice this, 27, 28. Remember we talked about this last time, Jacob versus Israel. It says, verse 28, then Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go to see him before I die. Literally, I will go to see him, then I can die. That's what he says there. I'm gonna see him, and then have you guys ever said that? You know, if I could just do that, then I could die. You know, if I could just see that, or if I could just experience that, then I've completed everything I wanted to do here, and then I could die. And that's really what he's saying here. So, verse 1, so Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to God, the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in a vision of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. In other words, you're going to go down to Egypt, I'm going to go with you, things are going to go well with you, and your son Joseph, who you thought was dead, the son that you've been grieving these last 20 years, is the one who's going to close your eyes when you take your last breath. He's the one that's going to close your eyes at your funeral. And so what a comforting thought for him to know that. But God, he comes to him in this vision, and I love that Israel would go down to Beersheba before he just gets in the cart and goes to Egypt. Oh, Joseph's alive. We got to get in the car, guys. We got to go. We got to hurry and see him. You know, no, he goes down and he worships the Lord. He offers a sacrifice to the Lord. And I think that that's something that we miss sometimes. I don't know, oftentimes we pray when things are going bad, you know, 911 prayers. God, help me, everything's horrible, you know, my life is falling apart, help me. And then things go good. And we're like, woohoo, party time. And we run off and forget to thank God. But not Jacob. Jacob finds out, believes, sees the carts. He's like, you know what? I believe it. My son is alive. And the first thing he does, instead of going to see his son, which would have been the impulse, right? He goes and he worships the Lord. He gives a sacrifice of offering to the Lord. And that's where our heart should be. You know, we praise the Lord in the bad times, but we also have to praise him in the good times. You know, and sometimes sometimes for some people maybe it's easier to praise him in the good times and not so easy to praise him in the bad times, but we have to praise him at both. You know, that's what he's worthy of it, to be praised in good times and bad times. And so he says, I'm going to take you down to Egypt and I will bring you up again. But he's not talking about him specifically, but he's talking about his offspring. He's going to bring the children of Israel back out of Egypt. And you remember, they'll be there for 400 years. Now that's significant, because what did God tell Abraham? He said, I am going to bring your descendants to a foreign land, and they will be there for, anybody remember how long they're going to be there? Remember what God said? 4 generations. How long were they there? 400 years. 400 years. Long generations. So we see that Jacob lives to 130. And so 4 generations, 400 years they're in the land of Egypt. until they're brought back out again. Now, why did God say, I'm going to put your people in the land of a foreign land for 400 years or 4 generations? Why did he say that? Does anybody remember that? Most of you were here when we talked about it. The iniquity of the Amorites, yeah. Good job, Matt. Yeah, till the iniquity of the Amorites, which were Canaanites. But yeah, so all the Canaanite peoples were completely corrupt at that time. But there was still a little bit of hope for the Amorites. And so rather than God saying, go in and take the land away from the Canaanites, which all of them would have been fine to take the land away from, it was the Amorites. Still some good in them. Still some hope there. And it took 400 years before all hope was lost. And the society would be completely eaten up by perversity and abuse and just horrible things that you can only imagine. You know, I mean, our country is headed there, but we're hundreds of years from where they were. You know, I mean, we're bad now, you know, the things that happen here now, but it was Sodom and Gomorrah type of stuff. You know, violent, militant, abusive, sexual aberrant behavior, and you know, just nothing was safe. And it was an awful, awful, awful thing. And you know, as you read about the things that they found amongst these Canaanite peoples, it would turn your stomach. And that's why God would say, go in and kill everything, kill everyone. You know, it was God's judgment. Just as he punished Sodom and Gomorrah by raining fire and brimstone on them, he would punish the Canaanite people by sending the Israelites in to wipe them out, utterly destroy them. And for the adults, it was God's judgment on them. They had plenty of time to repent. They saw what God did to the Egyptians. But for the children, it would be mercy. You know, they didn't have to grow up in that horrible, awful society. It's hard for us to grapple with these things, but God has his reasons for everything, and he's very patient. And that's why the children of Israel would be in Egypt for 400 years, because God is so patient. So he says, I'm going to bring you down to Egypt, but I'm going to bring you back up again out of Egypt. And Joseph will put his hands in your eyes. Verse 5, then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones and their wives in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. So they took their livestock and their goods, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt, Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his sons' sons, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all the descendants he brought with him to Egypt. Verse 8, now these are the names of the children of Israel, Jacob and his sons who went to Egypt. Reuben was Jacob's firstborn. And then from verse 9, I thought I put a break in here when it ended, all the way to like verse 27. It names all these people. And so for extra credit, you can go back and read all those names. And it's just Jacob and his 12 sons and all their wives and daughters and sons that are listed there. And so in verse 28 it says, then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen. And Joseph made ready his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Could you imagine? You know, I sat with many parents over the years who, you know, especially this last year, you know, we have 3 parents lose children. And to sit with them and to see how they grieve. And we've had people in our fellowship who've lost children years ago, and to see how that just never, you move on in your life, you keep living, but you never forget. There's not a day that goes by that you don't miss your child, that you don't grieve that child. And so can you imagine for 20 years thinking your son is dead, and then to find out he's alive? I mean, it has to be overwhelming beyond words. I mean, all those years of grieving, every day of sorrow, and then one day there he is in front of you again, It'd be unbelievable. I mean, what do you do with 20 years of grieving after that? You know, I mean, just beyond words. And they wept on his neck a good while, no doubt, you know, to cry, just completely broken. Verse 30, and Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive. He's saying, now that I've seen you, I can die. And he's going to live another 15 years, but, you know, he's very dramatic. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. So it shall be, when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation, that you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. What in the world does that mean? So basically he says, okay, so when you guys go into Pharaoh, and I don't know if you've seen the Ten Commandments, but they tried to do as much research as they could when Cecil B. DeMille put together the chamber of Pharaoh, and the people come in, and there's all these guards, and, you know, Pharaoh's up on this big high throne, and you have, you know, these people coming in before Pharaoh, and, you know, if they say the wrong thing, they could be skewered, you know, type of a situation. And so you have to realize this is a very imposing thing. And so he says, okay, when you go into Pharaoh, you need to tell him that you're a shepherd, because you don't want him inviting you up, kissing you, and then finding out you're a shepherd, right? Because the shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians. Or inviting you to dinner and realizing, oh, wait, Pharaoh can't eat with shepherds. And so he says, hey, it's going to be okay. Just tell them you're a shepherd when you get there, that it's not just us, but it's family generational thing. And why were shepherds such a bad thing? Well, because in Egypt at that time, much like India today, they had a caste system where different people lived on different planes. And the Egyptians were very sophisticated. They had amazing technology, I mean, beyond what some things that what we have today. And so they were, you know, considered high society. And the cities where the Pharaoh lived was a high society city. There weren't animals running around. You know, you kind of think, oh, there's goats everywhere. No, they had a very, very organized city. The livestock would be on the outside. Everything inside would be very clean. They were germaphobes. They shaved their whole bodies. They just kind of lived. They're very weird. You know, we read these hieroglyphics, and honestly, it's only been, you know, a very short period of time that we've been able to read the things that the Egyptians say. But, you know, they've found hieroglyphic pictures of shepherds, and they're usually missing a leg or missing an eye in the picture. You know, they're just kind of considered the lowest caste of society. And so, you know, being an abomination to Pharaoh, you know, and of course Pharaoh was considered the shepherd king over the people of Egypt. And so somebody who was low enough to watch animals for an occupation was considered a low life. And so that was kind of the situation. So he says, make sure you tell them that you're shepherds, and when you go in, everything will be fine. And so pretty amazing. And that's all the time we have.